So Trump did promise that there's going to be peace in Ukraine, I think 24 hours after he took office. Now, I, when he said that statement, it's already like crazy because you don't have to promise like crazy things. Like you can like make like whenever I call him out for like, well, he said it's gonna be like in 24 hours, and someone responds, well, he didn't like mean it, or why are you taking him on every word? But it's like I didn't force him to say he's gonna solve it in 24 hours. But whatever. Now he seems like now he started finally trying to figure it out, and he figured it out by first, of course, calling Vladimir Putin. Now, today we're gonna discuss what this might mean. Now, with Trump, we of course don't know a lot, but there's been some leaks about what could potentially happen. And well, first, before we go into it, I sort of want to discuss, and welcome to the Daily Objective. Joining me today is James Valliant. I first want to discuss sort of what is even or what should be uh, United States role when it comes to Ukraine, because many people, I think even few objectivists, are sort of restrictive when it comes to aid for Ukraine, and I could see some justification for it. Now, the way I'm thinking about it is that Russia is absolutely a foreign adversary of America. Russia is getting involved itself in American elections. It's trying to affect American elections. It's trying to affect European elections. It directly threatens America when it comes to when the Houthis were attacking international shipping. They got the help from Russia. Russia is a big ally of Iran and China. Iran should not even exist, let alone yeah, be able to like be do anything or be allied to anyone. So I think America absolutely has interest in or not even interest, but obligation of doing something about Russia. Now, I think we are in sort of I call it like a curse of a mixed economy, or a curse of like a mixed system, where basically, this issue should have been solved about like 80 years ago, when we should have not supported Soviet Union. And then we should have not allowed Soviet Union to be part of UN. We should have not allowed China to be part of the UN. We should have destroyed Iran the first time it took American hostages. And now we are sort of living the consequences of it. And we are in this like weird situation where some people, especially libertarians, like to argue, well, America has no business sort of using taxpayers' money to sort of help Ukraine. But it's like like America has a business in destroying Russia, and it should have done that a long time ago. And now we are in this weird conflict where if I can at least get some aid for Ukraine, I'm sort of happy. But I do understand the idea of sort of Americans shouldn't pay for foreign aid for different countries, but America absolutely has an obligation to do something about Russia. So I can sort of understand it, but yeah, this is just sort of to start this conversation. James, what do you make of some, let's say, libertarians sort of trying to argue that America has no business sort of supporting Ukraine, or
Well,
use taxpayers' money to support Ukraine?
well, libertarians are absolutely wrong on foreign policy in general. Military aid to the victim of aggression by a neighboring dictator is exactly what we're looking at here. You're right, the seeds of this problem were sown decades earlier. But in the early 1990s, when the Soviet Empire did fall apart, there was an understanding. I mean, Ukraine's nuclear weapons went back to Russia as part of the deal in which Russia recognized the borders of Ukraine. Furthermore, the excuse, and this is what's really despicable about Trump's position, the excuse is, and this is something libertarians would probably agree with on Trump. They're on the same wavelength. Saying, even considering admitting Ukraine to NATO, it was a reasonable threat, an act of aggression in itself. I can understand why Putin would invade Ukraine. Now, Putin tried to take over the whole damn country. It's true, we did nothing. What was it, back when Obama was president? Crimea was taken over. And what did the West do? Nothing. Now, Trump says it would never, the most recent invasion would never have happened if he were president. Well, whether or not that's true, that's not a long-term solution. And Russia is the aggressor here. and Russia is threatening our NATO allies. Now, so for all those, Putin is a murderous dictator who kills his own rivals within his country and without his country. As you point out, he tries to affect elections in foreign countries. And it is not a reasonable position, which Mr. Trump has morally sanctioned when he says that considering NATO, including Ukraine and NATO, was somehow gave Putin a reasonable basis for invading a neighboring country that had done nothing aggressive to him. No, this was sheer aggression by a dictator. And you can see that they are a threat to the world. They're getting closer in their ties with China. They're using Iranian drones. They're using North Korean troops. No, they're part of an axis of evil. Evil dictators, aggressive dictatorships. Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, they're getting closer together. And that tells you right there that America has a very powerful vested interest in making sure that we don't appease Russia. Now, libertarians don't like foreign aid at all. They don't like military aid at all. They would have isolationism, as they call it, complete fortress America, not even a fortress America, because they don't even agree with defense spending, some of these libertarians. But libertarians in general wouldn't want us to be involved at all. But when you let an aggressor get away with it, if you let an aggressor get away with it, you're asking for more. Yesterday in Munich, J.D. Vance, the vice president, said that we will pursue peace with Putin. But to get that peace, he said we will use economic pressure and even military options are on the table. Now, that sounds good to me, but what does he mean? Russia comes back and says, what do you mean? Moscow has asked for clarification from the vice president. What do you mean by military pressure? Well, we should have, back when this happened, Biden should not have been withholding the weapons that Ukraine needed to end this war efficiently and effectively. This war is dragged on precisely because, similar to the Israel situation, America was putting handcuffs on the defense of against the aggression. And when you're facing aggression, like with Iran in the Middle East and its proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, what you do is you don't sanction the aggression. That's the very worst kind of policy. And you don't put, worse still is to put handcuffs on the people trying to defend themselves. But Biden thwarted Israel in a proper defense of itself. Now, I'm not defending Netanyahu. I'm not sure what he would have done even without those handcuffs. Probably wouldn't have been a proper response. But nonetheless, America trying to put handcuffs on the fight against aggression is what perpetuates the war. And as I say, the very worst thing that is involved is Trump giving moral sanction to the idea that someone joining NATO is a threat to Russia. It is a defensive pact. It has not been engaged in aggression like Russia has over the last century, but particularly right now with respect to Ukraine. No, we've been sanctioning Russian aggression, and therefore we get more Russian aggression. So if what Mr. Vance means is let Ukraine attack deep into Russia, let Ukraine have the high-tech weapons that can actually end this war favorably and against Putin and protect Ukraine. So the question becomes, how much of Ukraine do we have to surrender? Does Ukraine have to surrender to appease Mr. Putin in his aggression? No, it is a total sellout, and we are setting ourselves up for more Russian aggression. Somewhere, somehow, if we reward Russian aggression in Ukraine, which is precisely what a peace deal now is. Yes, you can't really take Trump at his word, ever. So before he gets elected, he says, maybe even before I take office, I'll have worked out a peace. On day one, we'll have peace. And of course, we'll have immediate peace. And that, after he said that, I said on this program that Ukraine may turn out to be a more complex issue than he realizes. I think he's found that out. But the point is that you don't get a good deal by one sanctioning the very reason, the shoddy justification that Putin had for invading. Oh, well, you can't have Ukraine in NATO. Ukraine in NATO presents no threat to Russia, no objective threat whatever. It is pure nationalist, aggressive impulses that motivated Putin here. And if we reward him with 1 square meter of territory, what you're doing is you're rewarding that aggression. And as I say, it began much earlier, even before Trump, back in the Obama time. What was it, more than 10 years ago? Russia invaded Crimea, and and we sanctioned that. And so we got the full scale attack that what happened in spring of 2022. And for 2 years, what did Biden do? He delayed giving Ukraine the weapons they needed in order to, and the permission to attack deep into Russia. They have to have that permission. They have to. It's put a lot. They don't like it because Russia's a nuclear power. It rattles its nuclear sabers. Well, guess what? They're really not likely to use nuclear weapons, even if, and we've seen it now, when Ukraine attacks deep into Russian territory. That's called self-defense. If you can't attack the other guy's territory, you cannot wage successful self-defensive action, and it is that hindrance that has prolonged this. Of course, it was the earlier sanctioning that caused it to happen in the first place, of course, but that's why you never sanction a dictator. And so saying I respect Mr. Putin and we get along and what a strong guy he is, and boy, we can really work it out with him, that itself is the problem. By sanctioning Putin as such, we are already walking in the door, in a moral sense, behind the eight ball. We're never really going to have a successful pushback on Russia unless we give them both the military hardware they need, the permission to attack deep in Russia, which only came late, and third, and maybe most important, moral sanctioning of an aggressive dictator like Vladimir Putin.
We have a super chat from Bonnie. Thank you so much. And yeah, now I mean, you mentioned JD Vance, sorry, was in Munich, which again, it's sort of funny that the NATO summit happened in Munich right now when we're talking about sort of betraying Ukraine. I mean, if I put it in a book, it would be like my editor would be like, "This is too obvious. Like you cannot have it in like the same city." Um, but yeah, again, like the moral travesty of this whole. Well, one thing I wanted to mention a bit earlier when it comes to sort of, I think Biden did a lot when the war started, when it came to sort of bringing the world behind Ukraine, because Europe was, as always, pretty much incapable of like doing anything by themselves. So it had to be Biden, and of course, I think all the criticism still stands. The fact that we didn't, for the longest time, we didn't allow Ukraine to strike within Russia. We didn't provide Ukraine with, I think, certain missiles that can go into Russian territory. And we've seen that Putin has been bluffing. He said if Russian sovereignty is ever threatened, they would not refrain from using nuclear weapons. Now, when he said that, the big discussion was, well, what if Ukraine reconquers Crimea or Donetsk and Luhansk regions? Because Russia did consider that sort of like a sovereign territory, definitely with Crimea and potentially even with Donetsk and Luhansk. But the discussion was sort of changed when Ukraine invaded Kursk and nothing happened. So we saw that it's not just Western leaders that do not care for red lines and just say them and don't actually stand behind them. It looks like Putin is not really strong enough to enforce his red lines either. So I think it really showed weakness, and the fact that now Trump comes into office and his first call when it comes to this conflict is not to Zelensky but to Putin. And so yeah, well, so he had Trump had a call with Putin, and now we, for the most part, don't know what he really said, which again is already kind of weird, because like he's not your like crush, your secret crush. You like, oh, I don't want to say what we talked about. Like you are the president of the United States, you have a certain responsibility toward its people to say what are you talking. Like, did you come out with a new treaty of Tordesillas where you like split the earth between Russia and U.S. influence, or what is going on? Like, do we know anything? And but we had some leaks about it, so I'll just bring it up. So something that Trump has been talking about is potentially lifting up sanctions on Russia, which again I think is crazy. Russia is absolutely a foreign adversary. There is nothing we can benefit with dealing with Russia. We have it on its knees. Why would we now stop it? Why would we now like let down? We've seen. And if we were better prepared, we would be able to deal with the fact that we couldn't get Russian gas, for example. And countries have prepared for it. Just recently, the Baltic nations have cut themselves off from the Russian electrical grid and have joined the European one. So there's many things that are going good. Why would you now stop? Why would you now sort of let down?
Yeah,
Uh,
one thing I don't understand is, well, a couple of new nations have entered NATO because of this whole conflict. Did that represent an aggressive threat to Russia? No, membership in NATO is no reasonable cause to go to war. In itself, it doesn't cause more war. I mean, should we, because some new nation joins NATO, does that give Russia the right to invade that nation? Did they have the power to? No. But I do think that in some sense, Zelensky is right when he says that we should expect more aggression from Russia if the West, if Europeans and America allow Putin to make territorial gains, significant territorial gains because of this war. It's just sanctioning evil. Um, I don't know that Russia has the capacity to do a full scale war in Europe, but what about one of these Balkan states that you just mentioned? What would prevent him from invading them? I mean, their admission into NATO. So what Putin doesn't want is a united front against any further aggression that he might engage in. And that's exactly what's happening here. By saying, and as I say, the most despicable part of it is that Trump agrees. Trump seems to think that somehow NATO admission for Ukraine is a threat, a reasonable threat to Russia in some way. It isn't. NATO is not an aggressive alliance. It's a defensive alliance. And yes, of course, Europeans they do not take a proper moral stance any more than America takes a proper moral stance against this aggression. Trump makes a point when he says, "Look, we've spent 300 billion on Ukraine, and Europe has only spent 100 billion on Ukraine." But that's
Wait,
with it.
is that even true? Because last time I checked, we are pretty much like 50-50.
Well, that's what Trump said the other day. So forgive me for quoting someone that cannot be inherently trusted and whose words rarely actually mean anything. But that's what Trump says. There is a point, though, to what you'd said earlier about Europe stepping up and Europe recognizing their own role, because let's face it, it's Europe that's being threatened most directly by this. And they should be as morally clear as Trump is not being morally clear, as we ought to be morally clear about this matter. And so we're asking for more aggression. I don't know. I mean, Zelensky does say that more European aggression can be expected if the West doesn't do something about this. And I think in the long run, that's absolutely correct. We can't even allow the idea that suggesting NATO membership is somehow a real threat to this monster Putin. He is a murderous dictator, and nothing could have proved that more conclusively than, say, his total invasion of Ukraine. I mean, it's a good thing he was pushed back from Kyiv, the capital. The man wanted to take over the whole country, and the fact that it's been contained to the east is a good thing. But what? How much of that territory are we going to give Putin in reward for his aggression? It's wrong, 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 wrong. Um, but neither side in the fight, like I say, has been morally consistent. And it's that kind of moral consistency, just as with Israel, it's that kind of moral consistency that loses the war before we even begin it.
We have a super chat from Christian. Thank you so much. He says the Europeans didn't deliver fast enough material. What was delivered came with stupid restrictions, and Europe has not enough military production. That way, Ukraine cannot win. Europe is to blame here. I absolutely believe Europe bears responsibility here because it is truly like now. When it comes to, we have no idea what Trump's plans are, but when it comes to if he figures out some sort of a deal for Ukrainians. Again, without Ukrainians, Zelensky pretty much said, I haven't talked to anyone. I'm not accepting anything. And if this would mean some sort of a threat, because that, again, sort of going back to the Munich agreement, that's what it was. They pretty much decided, okay, we're gonna do this. Now, Czechoslovakia could refuse and not follow with it, but it wouldn't have the West behind it. France and UK pretty much said, you're alone here. We've decided what we're gonna do. It's ethnic Russians. You gotta give them up. Oh, sorry, ethnic Germans. Freudian slip. And it's actually a very similar scenario. Again, Russia is arguing, well, it's ethnic Russians. We just feel like they are being threatened, so we just wanna rejoin with the ethnic Russians. It's actually insane how like
It's a
similar
collectivist
it
argument.
is.
It's a total collectivist argument, isn't it? Is like these are the people that the indigenous. They notice they'll use the term like that, and when it comes to especially the Middle East problem, these are the indigenous people, and therefore they have some collective connection, collectivist sort of connection, tribalist. I think is the correct word, connection to that. No, I don't want Russia to have territory. Full stop. When the Soviet Empire broke up, it was a good thing. It gave many regions in Eastern Europe a chance to do something much, much better, and they've done so. And but what kind of, I ignore Zelensky, I ignore NATO, says Trump, I'll cut my own deal. Why should anyone else have to respect that deal? But the point is, America is, whatever the numbers are, if America is even 50-50 with Europe, that makes America a huge player of influence on poor Zelensky and Ukraine. If Trump stabs them in the back, it will reduce their options. But Trump is probably perfectly happy to cut his own side deal. You and me, Putin, let's make a deal. That's Mr. Trump's way. You'll notice that we got a prisoner out of Russia just, what was it, yesterday or day before yesterday. And I'm sure all kinds of other, Putin is willing to use humans as bargaining tools, and Trump is perfectly willing to let that be part of a deal, and sell out Ukraine in effect, because of whatever deal he might be able to get with Putin. But cutting Zelensky out of that, cutting NATO out of that discussion is not helpful. It's simply a betrayal of Ukraine when they were the victims of aggression. And that's the thing that has to constantly be borne in mind. As I say, the bottom line is, how much sanction will Trump give this aggression? How much reward will Putin have at the end of the day? Because if Trump does succeed in what he says he wants, a deal with Putin, it will almost certainly involve the surrender of major parts of eastern Ukraine to Russia. And that is simply intolerable. It's rewarding the aggression. And no ethnicity type arguments are persuasive with me. Oh, well, there's a bunch of ethnic Russians here. So what? There are a bunch of ethnic Russians here in the United States, too. I mean, I know a lot of ethnic Russians in Canada and the United States. What does that make those parts of Canada and the United States Russian territory because there are large numbers of ethnic Russians in North America? It does not. It's an absurd moral argument. It's a racist, collectivist kind of moral argument. We don't want you to be part of an evil dictatorship, an aggressive dictatorship. It's that simple.
Yeah. So when it comes to sort of what again we might see in the deal, I should mention that Zelensky has pretty much said he will not meet with Putin or not talk to Putin until there is some sort of a united deal between Ukraine and America. So basically, Ukraine or Zelensky and Trump agree on some sort of a deal first, and then they go with that together to Russia, which again, I think, for the most part, I think big. When I'm gonna talk now, this is for Ukrainians to decide, as they unfortunately have been dying for 3 years now, and I think morally you cannot surrender an inch to evil. But I would understand if Ukrainians simply do not have the will, which I don't. I believe that's still not true. Majority of Ukrainians still want to continue fighting, but might accept some sort of a deal that is acceptable. So if Zelensky says that we cannot simply do this, absolutely acceptable, but it cannot be that they are being thrown under the bus, basically.
But
So
that's what Trump is saying. Let's throw him under the bus and cut Zelensky out of it. If we're really trying to stop Russian aggression, then of course we have to include Zelensky in this. We can't force something on Zelensky. And by force something on Zelensky, I mean hesitate in our support for them, tie their hands in their reaction. What you have to do is let Zelensky do what he needs to do. And if you mean to militarily stop Russia, you have to give Ukraine all the weapons they need, whatever missiles, whatever drones, whatever fighter jets they need. And if you don't trust Ukraine with them, then we will wield them. I don't see what the significant difference is. In other words, de facto, Europeans were saying that we're on a glide path, an unavoidable glide path for Ukraine to be part of NATO. Well, that's the very thing that Trump is betraying. He's betraying the idea that somehow NATO are the good guys, in effect. He's saying NATO poses an existential threat to Russia. Well, you're damn right if Russia is being aggressive. I note that Britain has not stopped believing that Ukraine should be part of NATO. At least those discussions should continue. Because, ladies and gentlemen, being a member of NATO is no threat to Russia. It's only a threat to their aggressive ambitions. It's really only a threat to their aggressive ambitions. And do Europeans need to step up more? Well, yeah, America needs to step up more and take the handcuffs off Zelensky. The West has had a poor response, in my view, to Russian aggression here, and that has only prolonged this war and caused tens of thousands more deaths than were necessary. If America and the West had immediately responded and immediately allowed Ukraine to attack deep inside, given them the weapons without hesitation, maybe even I'm not suggesting boots on the ground even, it maybe even helped in other strategic ways, kinetic ways and strategic ways, this war might have been over long ago, and Russia would have their butts kicked out completely. But you're right, cutting Zelensky out of any deal is obviously to stab Ukraine in the back.
yeah, and I'll come out as European internationalist right now. If it happens that Trump pretty much uh, gives up on sort of being or pretty much says that America is no longer the leader of the free world, and America no longer cares what's happening in the world. I'm saying let's kick America out of NATO and let's actually get this alliance to do something that is supposed to do. And and yeah, like the like it's really disappointing. Like Europe has now the best chance it almost ever had to sort of like do something to figure out what to do when it comes to united security, when it comes to security of aspiring nations. Because again, Ukraine was an aspiring NATO member pretty much since it was created. As with many, you had like I remember when Slovakia joined NATO, it was a big deal. And it was one thing that was disappointing before Slovakia joined NATO is that we actually missed the train the first time. Because when Poland, Czechia, and Hungary joined, Slovakia was not ready for it because we had a corrupt government. And, then the next prime minister had to figure it out. Like, we really want to join NATO. You cannot even imagine how necessary NATO is for small countries like Slovakia, for small countries like the Baltics. Like they cannot survive on their own. It's simply there is no amount of money, there is no percentage of GDP a small country can spend to be able to realistically defend itself. You need these big alliances. You need something like NATO, and yeah, so that's why. I mean, just to bring up again from the leaks of what was potentially part of the deal. So basically, it would mean that Ukraine would have to withdraw from Kursk and also would recognize the sovereignty of all territory that is currently held by Russia. Now, with if you combine that with recent words of Pete Hegseth, who said that who doubled down and for the second time said Ukraine is not going into NATO. Again, you're pretty much saying, okay, Russia won, and because again, What is Russia's goal? Russia's goal is for Ukraine to not join NATO. That's the number one goal they are going for. They don't care what they get as long as they secure. That's why they invaded in 2014, because a country cannot join NATO unless all its territorial disputes are dealt with. So that's why Russia invaded parts of Georgia, because Georgia cannot join NATO until they figure out their two disputed territories.
That's
Ukraine cannot
lunacy.
join NATO until they figure out Crimea.
That's lunacy. I hate to use another obvious kind of example. If there's some territorial dispute between Canada and the United States, we can negotiate it out. It's not a question of threatening or belonging to NATO that's the issue. If there's a territorial issue, let's say between Latvia and Estonia, their membership in NATO does not prevent them from working out some border dispute or territory dispute, does it? It's the gun threat. It's the threat of invasion that's the problem. When you point a gun or actually use the gun, like Russia did in Ukraine, it's no longer a negotiation over some reasonable disagreement that people might have over some border or territory. And you don't need to work out these territorial disputes before you say you can join NATO. No, what we're saying is you can't use force. You can't use aggressive force in trying to resolve your differences with other nations. And the very idea that we have to work out some territorial compromise with Russia when it comes to territory that they have seized by aggression, and then, I mean, combine the two. Look at that. You say, okay, we agree. Ukraine you're on your own. Russia, I guess, can invade you again anytime they want, because that's what failing to belong to NATO actually means. We're giving them the future green light and sanction to a potential future invasion of Ukraine, aren't we? Oh no, we NATO nations. Don't worry, the United States and Great Britain and Germany won't come to your aid if you get invaded again. That's what we're saying. NATO is a self-defense agreement. It's not an aggressive alliance at all. And the idea that you need to work out territorial disputes without being admitted to NATO is insane. That assumes what the aggressor is saying is true, that somehow the aggressor is correct and they have a moral claim to other people's territory, to other countries' territory. No, if you have an honest dispute, NATO membership wouldn't stop that. And NATO membership is in its own terms not an aggressive threat to Russia. But yet Trump precisely sanctions that argument. He sanctions the very justification for an aggressive dictator to invade Ukraine. He's saying, I agree with Putin's monstrous justification for aggressive war. And that I find despicable. I find that to be the most despicable aspect of this entire thing. Yes, giving them an inch of the Donbass region would, in my view, be a total betrayal. But in the very worst thing he's saying is, yes, NATO membership was a reasonable justification for Putin to invade Ukraine, because that is exactly what Trump is saying when he said it was stupid. What he said just the other night, it was stupid to say that to even consider Ukraine from entering NATO. What do you mean? You mean it was justified? That would then morally justify Russia's aggression? No, it would not. And what Trump is doing is he's morally sanctioning the bizarre evil of Putin's excuse for doing the war. Now, of course, that's what Russia wants, is Ukraine to be subject to future invasion without the powers of the West coming to their defense. That's all NATO membership means. But Trump sanctions the evil justification that Putin gave for starting the war in the first place. Trump puts it in a frame and says it's absolutely correct, joining it. But why wouldn't that have applied to Sweden? Why wouldn't that have applied to the Baltic states? Why wouldn't that have applied to Poland, which was one of the first of the former Eastern Bloc nations that joined NATO? Were those justifications for invasion? No. And when Trump sanctions that, says, okay, well, we shouldn't even consider that, then what he's doing is he's saying that Putin had a moral justification for invading Ukraine. That is despicably evil. That is to sanction and to endorse the bizarre justification, the evil justification that Putin had for invading a neighbor.
Yeah, and again, when it comes to sort of the idea of an enlargement of NATO, Russian aggression is the number one reason why NATO expands. It's not that a country joins NATO and then Russia invades. It's Russia invades and then countries join NATO. Again, Sweden or Finland and yeah, both Finland and Sweden joined after the Russian invasion.
Sure.
When was the last expansion? Uh, let's say the last expansion eastward towards Russia before Russian invasion, it was in 2004. That's when the Baltics and Romania and Slovakia, among others, and Bulgaria joined. And if you're saying that NATO expansion leads to Russian invasion, it took Russia 10 years to respond to this expansion when they decided to invade Ukraine. Like again, this whole idea is simply ridiculous. And yeah, I mean, it's stupid. And the fact that we would straight up say no, Ukraine will never join NATO, it pretty much just seems, yeah, if you do not want for country to join NATO, invade it before they join NATO. Like this is insane. And then there is also the second part of the issue is a NATO country was never invaded. And the question is, what will happen when that happens? When, let's say, one of the Baltic nations or Finland or any other nation gets invaded by Russia, what's going to happen? Will we respond? Will we actually trigger the Article 5, which talks about what happens when such a thing does happen? That's a question in the air now with Trump in office.
Yeah. So if we say we are going to contain Russian aggression, that's a threat to Russia. That's what it comes down to. We have to sanction Russia's ability to continue to do further aggression, or we're asking for war with Russia. Now, that is the bizarre madness that Trump's position is, and it is a total sanctioning of Putin's excuse for invading Ukraine in the first place. That's just talk about a lack of moral compass. Trump does not see the world in terms of morality. He doesn't see dictators as bad people. They're powerful, they're smart, he likes them, whether it's Xi in China, whether it's the leader of North Korea, whether it's Mr. Putin. He will find complimentary words for dictators, the most brutal dictators in the world. And there is no one on this planet, no one so evil on this planet that Trump won't cut a deal with them, which can only sanction their evil and their aggression. Yeah, containing Russia from their aggression is not aggression against Russia. It's the opposite. To buy into Putin's excuse is to, in effect, give moral sanction to future Russian aggression. Gosh, we invaded I know that Latvia and Estonia are now parts of NATO, but gosh, that very threat was so dangerous to Russia. We, the Russians, now have to invade the Baltic nations. Oh, now talk about moral perversion. Talk about getting it upside down to the point that what you're doing is you're encouraging future aggression. Again, I don't know when, how, or where, but what you're doing is you're sanctioning future aggression. And you're continuing to give survival to this evil Putin regime, to this murderous dictator's regime that, as we have seen, does not hesitate from doing aggressive warfare. And when a dictator becomes an aggressor like that, yeah, it is a threat to the civilized world as such. Every aggressive dictator. Now, I'm not saying we have priorities, obviously, and each nation needs to do what it needs to do for its own self-defense and what it can do. But the point is that every aggressive dictator poses a threat to the civilized, peaceful world.
Someone is asking, is that worse than the limp-wristed resistance than Biden offered? Yeah. Half response to dictatorship is better than surrendering to dictatorship.
Exactly.
Now,
I mean, it was limp. Yes, it was. And that's what dragged the war on. It was the handcuffs and the slow moving action of Biden that dragged the war on and on and on, I grant you. But at least Biden was willing to help a nation that had been invaded by an aggressive dictator. Full stop. I mean, military aid, and this is where libertarians, getting back to your full circle back onto your libertarians, the foreign aid is one thing. Military aid to defend a country from being invaded by an aggressive dictator is quite another. That is in the interests of the civilized world and America as such. You, talk about getting everything inside out, upside down, and backwards. No, helping Ukraine defend itself is better than not helping them at all. Putting those handcuffs and restraints and slow walking it can only prolong the war. And give an excuse to the Trump types who say we need to have peace now, no matter what, even if we have to give up all the territory of eastern Ukraine and promise that Ukraine will never be part of NATO. That is evil. You know, as I say, way back in the 1990s, when the Soviet Empire fell apart, we had an agreement, in effect. And talk about the despicable part of it was we give Russia the nuclear weapons that it had in Ukraine in exchange for recognizing Ukraine's territorial integrity, something they never had any intention of, as it turns out, of abiding by. So at the end of the day, we let Russia keep all the old Soviet nuclear weapons, even the ones that were in Ukraine, and they get to take over chunks of Ukraine anytime they want, whether it's Crimea in 2014, or now whatever territory they can get from this latest invasion since 2022. No, we just keep sanctioning and rewarding an aggressive dictator. I can't figure that out for my life.
Someone is asking, have not seen President Trump do 180 turns on what he says, unless my memory fails me. Well, few examples. He railed against Obamacare. He ran to repeal Obamacare. He failed at doing it, and now is defending it. He, when it came to Tulsi Gabbard, he was calling her out for what she was, and now it's his director of national security. He
Trump
said
gave us
RFK.
Fauci. Trump gave us Fauci. Trump gave us the lockdowns. Now Trump is Mr. Anti-lockdown. The COVID thing was evil. When he was the one who gave us Fauci. Don't forget that. That's a big one right there. Huge domestic policy issue where Trump totally did it about face without any justification or explanation. His policies on COVID in 2020 were instrumental to him losing that election. Now, rather than confront the fact that he was part of the problem, he now pretends that it was all the other guy's problem all along. His vaccine, you see, he's now put the enemy of his vaccine in charge of Health and Human Services. Talk about an about face on an issue. No, Trump is, and there's no question about it in this case in particular. Trump said this would never have happened under my watch, but since it did happen, let's reward Russia. Okay, now that's a despicable betrayal. Now, but notice he's willing to even betray that. Vance yesterday said we'll put economic and military pressure on Russia to force a deal. Russia asks, what does that mean, military pressure? America, perfectly reasonable. You can't trust what comes out of Trump's mouth. Trump can say the most bizarre things, and Gaza, things he says about Gaza, for example. And we say, okay, well, we can't take him seriously. It's just an opening bid and a negotiation to get the other Arab states to do something. Okay, well, no, what he says matters. We have to be able to take seriously what a world leader, my God, the President of the United States says.
Just quickly, he responds, okay, so you mean people cannot learn from their previous decisions and make better policy choices in the future? He's not intern in some like software company when and he like uploaded like a library, like a wrong library to the system. He's the president of the United States. Yes, you cannot make mistakes. And when you do make mistakes, you should suffer politically for it. This is not a place to make mistakes. Like being president of the United States is not like a place where you figure out governing. Like, what is?
And I haven't yet heard an apology for his mistake.
Yeah.
If you say he's learned something, then the first proof that someone has actually learned something is like, oops, I made a mistake. Boy, that was a screw up. Boy, I did that wrong. Geez, that'll never happen again. You say it out loud. I screwed up. Trump will never say, I made a huge, big, fat mistake, whether it involves policy towards Russia or domestic COVID policy. Promise. But Trump has made plenty of mistakes himself and refuses to acknowledge. But that's, I mean, politicians have a hard time admitting mistakes. But the point is, if you're claiming that someone has learned from his mistakes, the first sign I look for when someone has actually learned from their mistakes is, I made a mistake, coming out of their mouth.
he brings up one more thing. I'll just read it up. Daniel and James, you're bringing up things from his last time in office 8 years ago. Yeah, that's when he was president last time. What else am I supposed to bring up?
His
Imagine that
track record is my best. His words aren't going to help me much, but his track record is the best thing I have to go on in attempting to predict the guy. Because really, I mean, does he mean to, when he says, I'm not going to take military force off the table when it comes to Greenland? Okay. Is he really going to invade Greenland or attack Denmark? I mean, no, the man uses words like blunt instruments, not like conceptual identifications of reality. That's the problem here. You can't believe Trump when he says something. It's an opening gambit in some grand, 4D chess match that he's doing in his head, rather than giving the world any kind of clarity or moral vision. If he had that kind of moral clarity or vision, of course, we would be attacking Iran right now. We would be taking the handcuffs off Zelensky right now and letting him have all the weapons he needs, even if we have to operate them. And not, they always say World War III. No, the attacks into Russia have not caused World War III or caused Putin to use nuclear weapons. And the only correct way to really make sure that never happens is to say, sir, if you even think about using nuclear weapons in Eastern Europe or Ukraine, you will be obliterated. Talk about, that's when we need someone. See, Trump says we'll blow Iran to smithereens if they do X. You have to be believed. That's why your words have to be credible. That's why you as a political leader have to be credible. So that when you say to Russia, if you even think about using nuclear weapons in the Ukraine theater or in Eastern Europe, we will blow you to smithereens. And that has to be able to stick and be believed by Putin and the rest of the world.
Akira in the chat said, we knew Trump was going to appease Putin, but why are we completely cool? Well, he's caps locking it. But why are we completely cool with Europeans doing nothing? So we talked about it. Yeah, it's absolutely pathetic, the fact that Europe is doing nothing. And I think that's a big part of it. And I think if Europe, or not even Europe, if we want to sort of live in sort of like free future, if Trump really is going to pretty much step down from America being the leader of the free nation, then someone else has to. And if it's not going to be Europe, it's going to be Russia and China. It's going to be Russia and China just imposing whatever sort of world order, whatever sort of system they want, if we do not have any response to it, if we are not united either with United States or just Europe in general.
Yeah. Can't sanction aggression, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm afraid that to the extent we don't have moral clarity and don't do what we need to stop aggression, like Russia's continuous aggression in Ukraine, then we are setting ourselves up for it, more aggression. That's all we end up doing, ladies and gentlemen. Sure that Trump will cut a deal with Putin and with or without Zelensky's sanction, and that's just despicable.
Someone in the chat says, James, are you calling for Third World War? Is that what you favor? And
no,
again, it's sort of like insane.
No. This is what's going to lead to World War III. No. What we saw was the extension of this war because we didn't go all out in our defense of Ukraine in the first place. No, that's what causes perpetual war and keeps us on the edge of World War III at all times. No. The whole thing that stops an aggressive dictator like Putin is the threat that we will blow you to smithereens if you dare to even consider using nuclear weapons there. I mean, that's the way you have to respond. That's what's going to prevent war. That's why it's such an irony, as Daniel pointed out, that this happened. Vance was speaking in Munich yesterday, saying that we're going to put pressure on Russia. Pressure on Russia to do what? Pressure on Russia to come to the table and agree to the territory that we'll surrender to them as a reward for their aggression. No, that invites World War III because that invites more wars in the future, more chances for World War III to break out.
Yeah, again, this sort of, these ominous parallels between, what happened before the Second World War. The fact that the same arguments were used. Do you want World War? No, we should appease Germany. And, there is a great quote again from Winston Churchill. You were given the choice between war and dishonor. You chose dishonor and you will have war because that's what happens when you appease dictators. It's not like Putin just wants a little bit of Ukraine, and then he's gonna be happy. He's gonna liberalize his economy. He's gonna have free elections, or any of that. Same thing with China and Iran. It's not like, well, if only Iran gets nuclear weapons, or if only Iran gets to conquer part of Iraq, then they'll liberalize. They'll lift restrictions. They'll actually reform Islam. No, it's they are dictatorships. They live and die by dictatorship, and you have to destroy them by that same dictatorship.
And letting Iran, now these are religious fanatics in Iran, I'm not sure they will have any hesitation against using nuclear weapons. I agree with Trump. We cannot have a nuclear Iran, but Trump is not willing to take out the regime in Tehran. Trump is willing to cut a deal with them. That is what will lead. I mean, at some point, in some way, that is what leads to more aggression, ladies and gentlemen. That's what, in the long run, will threaten nuclear holocaust in this world. And that's why we have to be sharp in our response to aggression from any dictator. That's why we have to be armed to the teeth and not allow more aggressive dictators to get nuclear weapons like in Iran. No, it's that policy of appeasement, whether it's Neville Chamberlain there or the West today when it comes to Iran and Russia. I mean this very seriously. When you appease an aggressive dictator, you're begging for war, a bigger war. You're just setting it up. You're creating more tinder and fuel for the bigger war to come. That's what will happen.
We have a super chat from Robert. Thank you so much. He says Donald Trump never admits mistakes, but to be fair, if he acknowledged every stupid thing he's ever said, he never have time to say anything else. And one really thing that sort of disappoints me, not about Trump, but about people who even support Trump, is that there are no standards. Like, if you go to a restaurant and like your soup is a bit too much salty, you're gonna make a fuss about it, or you're gonna call the guy. But Trump can. He can say he's gonna threaten the nations. He can like put tariffs and then take them back for no reason. He can like talk to dictators, appease dictators, and he's like, well, come on, like give him a shot. Like, do we have like no demands? Like, he is not like your monarch, like your sovereign. Like your sovereign, like your authoritarian leader. He's your servant. He's supposed to serve you as politician. That's their job. They're supposed to work for you. And the fact that we are just, oh, well, at least they do something for us, or well, at least they are not that bad, it's like incredible. The fact that we have like no demands of our politicians, no standards of our politicians, and just are happy with whatever we can get.
Yeah. What did Trump say? I mean, right on this point, did it may be news to Trump that he's not a monarch? I think that's what he sees himself as. He even admitted once that he liked being called by special titles like Your Excellency. So profoundly un-American. So profoundly un-American. No, Trump thinks that his strength and charisma is what's going to protect America. No, 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 no. If you look at it that way, then, well, sir, what happens when you leave then? It's all you. What? We should make you king in perpetuity? Forget elections at all? No, it's not a personality that we should be depending on. Anyone's personality that we should be depending on to protect civilization from aggression, whether it's aggression from Russia or Iran. It should be our moral principles that endure within the country and within an alliance, a defensive alliance like NATO. We are going to protect Western civilization, Western liberalism from aggressive attacks from dictators like Putin or the Ayatollah. It has to be our principles. Those are what are going to defend us in the long run, our adherence to principles and demanding that our leaders adhere to those principles.
I think Bonnie in the chat earlier was asking about what's Trump gonna do about tomorrow. Tomorrow is the hostage deal. So I believe I haven't checked recently about who banned it back, but basically Hamas will release hostages. Will release 3 hostages: Sagui Dekel-Chan, Yair Horn, and Sasha Trupanov.
They'll release 3,
yep.
Okay, and it'll still be dribs and drabs. And what happens to again? Talk about something that Trump doesn't really mean when he says it. He said all hell will break loose if all of them aren't released. Now imagine tomorrow noon passes, and I don't care whether it's noon Tel Aviv time or noon Greenwich time or noon Washington, D.C. time. If all of the hostages aren't released, and I'm pretty sure that all of the hostages won't be released, and Trump fails to deliver on that hell he promised, then he undermines his own credibility. He undermines the defense of the West. So talk about words again. You can't really believe the words that spill out of his mouth, because he said hell will break loose once more if all the hostages aren't released. And that's noon tomorrow. And that's noon tomorrow. And if 3 come out and we're still waiting for 70 more to come out after noon tomorrow, what becomes of Mr. Trump's word? And how could any leader in the world take it seriously? Words aren't words to Trump. You can't really take them at face value, especially in these kind of contexts. There's just another great example. I fear that that red line will be crossed. There will still be hostages after noon tomorrow, and Trump will only have betrayed his word, reducing what credibility he has.
Someone is asking, what is the current health condition of the hostages? How long can they live under these conditions? Well, we have no idea. I've read the report that apparently Red Cross is worried about what is the state of the hostages, but they were never allowed to meet the hostages. Now, as I've said earlier this week, since these exchanges do have to be coordinated with the Red Cross and are scheduled ahead of time, these 3 hostages are most likely the only thing we're getting. Especially if Hamas were to release all hostages, one, they wouldn't be able to, I think, even do it on such a short notice. And then it would have to be organized with the Red Cross ahead of time. So, no,
Well, if they're
this is what
dead
we're
or in
getting.
the hands of other groups or in the hands of civilians, and Hamas can't hand over the hostages, then the pretense of all these discussions would be shown for what it is, a dishonest pretense, where we accepted even the position that they could have released them. They may be in no position to be able to release them, and that's the pretense of dealing with Hamas. That is just a part of the despicable aspect of it. First, demonstrate to us that you can even release these hostages. But no. Before that, before you even talk to these monsters, you don't talk to these monsters. You deliver a unilateral threat, and you mean your words when you say them, and you follow up with your words when you say them. No, we're not going to negotiate with you. You have to release all the hostages, or there will be hell to pay. And you draw that red line, and when every single one of them is not accounted for, you deliver the hell you promised. That's the only sane way to deal with monsters like this.
We have a super chat from Robert. Thank you so much. He says, Donald Trump has done one impossible thing. He has made me wish that Kamala Harris was president of the United States, or literally anyone else. Now, this is a tough call. I was also someone sort of preferring someone else, but Donald Trump as being president, because I was worried of many things that are happening right now. But it's important to remember grass is always greener on the other side. The fact is, we now have no idea what would Kamala Harris's presidency look like. And so we are sort of comparing with something that's impossible. But it shouldn't sort of stop us from judging what Trump is doing now that it's
That's
really bad.
exactly it. I don't, in some ways, Harris might have been much worse, in some ways, maybe better. And there's really no way to be certain about that at this point. But I will criticize every single thing Trump says or does that is worthy of criticism. And stabbing Zelensky in Ukraine in the back and cutting his own deal with Russia would be one of the big things I would really find to criticize in Mr. Trump. Or not delivering the hell he promised if all the hostages aren't released by tomorrow at noon. Oh, but he made a similar promise earlier, didn't he? And then he was happy with the ridiculous deal that was drawn up that said, oh, yeah, well, a few at a time over a course of months while we negotiate other things. Okay, lovely. No, that is a betrayal of innocence all over the world if you don't follow up on your word, Mr. Trump. Let me criticize Trump for what I do know he's doing and saying now, rather than try and speculate as to what Miss Harris would have done. I don't think it would have been good, and I'm in no position to be certain about what it would be because she lost.
Well, with that, I think we've covered about 2 episodes worthy since we've been live for an hour. Now, I should say Happy Valentine to everybody who is celebrating. Trump. James has promised to be my Valentine, but don't tell that to James's wife. Um,
She
James,
knows. She's cool with it.
any last words, James?
No, I smile and I laugh, but this is grim business, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking about war and peace. We're talking about aggressive dictators on the march. That nothing could be more serious. Nothing in the world could be more serious than stopping aggressive dictators from invading countries and not rewarding them, not morally sanctioning them, letting them get away with it. That invites future war, ladies and gentlemen. And if you really are an advocate of peace and trying to avoid World War III, then you have to snip that aggression in the bud just as forcefully and as quickly as possible, and not give it any moral sanction in the meantime. Unfortunately, that's not the policy that American leaders of either party have followed at any time during my lifetime, nor do I expect that to change anytime soon. So I can't be sanguine about the chances of peace, but and I don't mean to laugh, but some of this is so absurd that it is risible.
And with that, thank you, James, for joining me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We'll be back. And as you've probably seen, there is no reality show today, but we did drag the video a bit longer to talk about what's happening in Ukraine. Let's hope for the best there. And as well as we have the hostage release tomorrow, so we'll probably cover that. So until tomorrow, thank you, everybody, for watching, and bye.
Be safe.